Now we're looking at the parables. And we're reading from Luke's Gospel, chapter 8, verse 9 and 10, that gives us a summary of this. His disciples asked him what this parable meant. And he said, the knowledge of the secrets of the kingdom of God has been given to you, but to others I speak in parables, so that though seeing they may not see, and though hearing they may not understand. You know, we often define parables as earthly stories with a heavenly meaning, and that's not a bad definition. But we need to know why Jesus changes from a direct message to majoring on parables, because it seems from here on in, he majors on parables. Now, what had happened is that Jesus, he heals a person, and the leaders and the community had to find an answer. How are you doing this? Well, there are a number of answers to that question. One, it was all smoke and mirrors. It was a con job. The person being healed was never really sick in the first place, and it was miraculous. Now, we know that's not true. You've only got to read John chapter 9 and see the story of the blind man, and you'll recognize that he was genuinely blind from birth. We know that because when the religious authorities questioned his parents, they confirmed it. When they questioned the neighbors, they confirmed it. So there's no question that Jesus healed. It was not smoke and mirrors. Well, then the second alternative would be it actually was real. This was a demonstration of the power of God. But that carries a problem with it for the Jewish leaders. You see, if this was God doing this through Jesus Christ, then surely they should be submissive to his authority and recognize him for who he was, the Messiah. But that would mean that they would lose their power, and they would also lose their lucrative business because they ran a corrupt business running the temple. So that was out. They were certainly not going to accept that it was from God. So where else would it come from? Well, they began to say he's doing all of these miracles in the name of Beelzebub, which is another word for the devil. Now, after that is accusing Jesus of doing the miracles in the power of the devil, from here on in, or from there on in, Jesus speaks to them predominantly in parables. And the idea of the picture that you have there on the card is you cover your one eye with your hand. Now, you can see with one eye covered, but you don't see as clearly as you can with two eyes. So it's almost like Jesus was hiding the message to make it just a little bit harder to see, to understand, to recognize. Hence, we say parables. But there's a deeper reason behind parables, I think, when you look at the big picture of the Bible. You need to recognize that what was happening on a day-to-day basis was that the people of Israel were moving towards the fulfillment of God's plan. And ultimately, God's plan was that Jesus would die on the cross. So what was going to make this possible? The Jewish people had to have been prevented from seeing the truth of who Jesus was. And that's what the Bible tells us. They were blinded from seeing that for a purpose. And the purpose was that their rejection of Jesus would lead to hatred, and that the hatred would ultimately end up having him crucified on the cross. So the nation was moving towards the fulfillment of God's plan. But then there's another thing that comes underneath that, because you see that as you read the Bible, for example, it speaks in Ephesians about the mystery of God, and the idea of mystery there is not something mysterious, but rather it's something that's hidden. The idea is that if you look at the Old Testament, you don't see any record of the Gentile, the non-Jewish people becoming part of God's forever family. That only happens when the death of Christ takes place and the gospel is opened up to everyone. As John said, he came to his own and his own received him not, but to as many as received him, that they would become children of God. So this to as many now opens it up to the Gentiles. And that's the point of it. God blinded them, those Jews, so that the Gentiles could be brought in. That's you and me, that we could be part of God's forever family. Also, as you read through the epistles and the Gospels, you'll find that it actually speaks about God's big plan, speaking or majoring to the Gentiles coming to an end. He talks about that the Gentile period will come to an end, and God will start going back and redirecting his message to the Jewish nation. I don't think it's by chance that Israel became a nation back in 1948. And I don't believe that it's just by chance that many of the things that are happening in the land of Israel today and the animosity of all the nations around about them are happening, because that's what the Bible indicates. We are fast moving towards the time when the period of the Gentiles will come to an end and God will start reworking, reministering with his own people, his own national people, the Jews. You ought to read Romans chapter 11 and just get that big picture of what's going to happen to that nation and going to happen to the Gentiles. So we put our hand over our eyes and we say parables, because we recognize that God made it harder for the nation to see the truth. But in doing that, he brought the nation of Israel to the place where they totally rejected Jesus because they couldn't see that he was who he was, the Son of God. Now, the problem is with you and I and the world that we live in, there is a blindness to the truth of who Jesus is. We know from 2 Corinthians 4:4, and I'll keep on coming back to that verse. It says, the God of this world blinds our minds, and it stops us from seeing who Jesus is, the glory of who he is. And it stops the truth of the gospel coming unto us. So when you think about parables, ask yourself, do you really see the truth of the gospel as it's presented to us in the New Testament? Well, let's go to the next card, because it tells us what they should have seen.
And we will get into that story in our next session. Hi, my name's Kalani and I'm a part of Australia's Walk Through the Bible family. I hope you are enjoying our walk through the New Testament. These cards have been a game changer in helping people learn the storyline of the Bible. The best way to learn is to teach others, so if you would like to buy a set of these cards, you can go to our website down below or scan the QR code on the screen. Also, to help prepare you for our next session, we will suggest the following Bible reading. Until next time, just remember our passion is to create a passion for God through his word.